In theory, 2028 should mark the end of Turkey's decades-long era of Erdogan. The Turkish constitution bars him from running for president again after his current term ends in 2028, by which time he will have spent 25 years ruling Turkey, first as prime minister and then as president. However, speculation is rife, not least because of comments from the president and his allies that Erdogan may seek to find a way around this term limit and run again, and perhaps again. So in this video, we're going to explore the ways Erdogan may seek to stay in office, how it relates to the Kurdish conflict, and whether it will actually work. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop when we release new videos. First things first though, we ought to explain Turkey's current constitutional setup, and how President Erdogan fits into it. For those who don't know, Erdogan, leader of the Justice and Development Party, or AKP, came to power in 2003 as Turkey's prime minister, back when Turkey had a parliamentary system. He was barred by party rules from seeking a fourth term as prime minister, and so instead ran for the presidency in 2014, in what was the Republic's first direct presidential election. While the post of president had largely been a symbolic one, Erdogan came into the role vowing to be an active president who would use the full extent of his constitutional powers. Having survived a failed coup attempt in 2016, Erdogan oversaw sweeping changes to the Turkish constitution that were narrowly approved in a referendum in 2017. The constitutional amendments scrapped the role of the prime minister and transformed Turkey from a parliamentary system into a presidential one, concentrating power in Erdogan's hands. Crucially, the newly updated constitution established that presidential terms would last for 5 years, and that the president would be limited to 2 terms. In 2018, Erdogan was re-elected president, and as you'll know, he was again re-elected in 2023. Now, ahead of the 2023 election, there was a whole feud over whether Erdogan was eligible to run. This was because his opponents said that Erdogan's first term was from 2014 to 2018, and his second was from 2018 to 2023, and that therefore he had already served 2 terms and was ineligible for another one due to term limits set out in the revised constitution. Erdogan and the AKP, however, argued that because Erdogan's election in 2018 was the first election since the constitution was amended, the 2018 to 2023 term was actually his first, making him therefore eligible to run for a second term in 2023. Ultimately, Turkey's Supreme Electoral Council rejected the opposition's objections and sided with Erdogan, who went on to win re-election. So why do people think that Erdogan may seek to run for another term? Well, one comment that's fueled recent speculation came from an ally of Erdogan, who said, wouldn't it be a natural and right choice to have our president elected once again if terror is eradicated, and if a heavy blow is dealt to inflation and Turkey secures political and economic stability? On top of this, Erdogan himself has made calls for a new constitution, and recently hinted at serving more terms by saying, as long as Allah grants me life and the nation approves, we will continue serving Turkey. If Erdogan is to stay in office beyond the end of his term, there are basically 2 legal ways that he can do so. The first is perhaps the most obvious. He, or rather Parliament, could amend the constitution, maybe adding a 3rd permitted term, maybe removing term limits altogether, or something to that effect. This is easier said than done though. The constitution stipulates that amendments must be approved by 2/3, that's 400 lawmakers, of the Grand National Assembly. Alternatively, if an amendment passes a lower threshold of 3/5, that's 360 lawmakers, then the amendment can be put to a national referendum. So, in other words, Erdogan would need a minimum of 360 votes in the Grand National Assembly to change the constitution. Currently, according to a Reuters tally, Erdogan's AKP and its allies have 321 seats, a fair amount short of what's needed. But there is another way that Erdogan could run again at the next election. According to the constitution, if the Turkish parliament decides to call early elections during the second term of the president, he or she may once again be a candidate. So, if parliament opted to hold elections before their scheduled date in 2028, Erdogan would be eligible to run. Crucially though, Parliament can only hold early elections by a 3/5 majority, so once again the 360 vote threshold becomes relevant. You can therefore see that either route enabling Erdogan to run again requires the support of more lawmakers than he and his allies currently have. In other words, a deal would have to be done. So where might they find the extra votes? Well, interestingly, this is where the story ties into Turkey's long-running conflict with Kurdish separatists. In recent weeks and months, there have been some noticeable cases of Erdogan and his allies making outreaches to Kurdish groups. For example, Devlet Bahçeli, a prominent nationalist and leader of the AKP-allied MHP, made some significant moves. In October, at the opening of Parliament, Bahçeli went and shook hands with lawmakers from the People's Equality and Democracy Party, or DEM, a pro-Kurdish party that Bahçeli has previously called to be shuttered and has accused of being an extension of the militant and outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. On top of this, Bahçeli made an unprecedented statement, considering his hardline position on the Kurdish issue, that the jailed head of the PKK, Abdullah Öcalan, could be granted parole if he renounced violence and disbanded his group. In a speech following these comments, President Erdogan said that his ruling alliance had opened a historic window of opportunity. And later it was reported that Öcalan, who has been imprisoned since 1999, has been allowed to meet with his family members face-to-face for the first time in 43 months. This outreach has been seen by some observers as laying the groundwork for securing the support of the pro-Kurdish DEM party, Parliament's third largest party, to enable Erdogan to run again. The outreach might be considered the carrot part of a carrot and stick approach, with the flip side being that Erdogan's government continues to remove some elected Kurdish local politicians from office. It's also worth saying that Erdogan and his allies' Kurdish outreach might be about more than just electoral politics. The Middle East is in flux, especially in areas where Turkey has interests, like neighbouring Iraq and Syria. For example, Iran-backed groups in those countries are being weakened by Israel, and the United States is preparing to wrap up its anti-IS coalition in Iraq, which will likely impact its ability to support Kurdish groups in Syria. This regional instability, and the potential for it to get worse, has led some to view Erdogan's outreach as an attempt to reinforce the domestic front and protect Turkey's interests. But regardless of the exact balance of motivations for Erdogan's recent manoeuvres, ending the 40-year Turkey-PKK conflict is no simple task. Even while the events we've discussed in this video were happening, a terror attack on a leading Turkish defense company, which authorities blamed on the PKK, killed 5 people, prompting the Turkish military to bombard Kurdish targets across northern Iraq and Syria.
This is just one of many major stories going on, with 2024 marking a major year in both news and elections. In fact, with the majority of the world heading to the polls, 2024 has been a pretty unique and important year. So, in the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, we discuss those elections, diving deep into the 29 biggest elections of the year, making sure that you understand what really happened, and commemorating one of the biggest years in news. We don't just discuss elections, though. We also run through China's trade issues, Biden's successes and failures, the UK's new opposition leader, and the state of the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Plus, the fact that it's a magazine means that we're not constrained by the time limits or algorithms imposed by YouTube. Unlike fleeting news cycles or algorithmic feeds, Too Long offers thought-provoking analysis and comprehensive coverage that's truly worth holding. Purchasing is also a great way to support the channel. Running TLDR this year has cost just under £800,000. So if you've enjoyed our coverage in 2024, then picking up a copy of Too Long doesn't just get you high-quality reporting, it also allows you to invest in independent journalism and join us in shaping the future of news. So if you're convinced, you have 3 more decisions to make. Firstly, do you want a physical or a digital copy? The physical one is a high-quality 60-page perfect-bound magazine, shipped right to your door. But the digital is slightly cheaper, especially if you're concerned about shipping. Your second choice is the standard or premium edition. The standard is just a copy of the magazine, while the premium issue gets you access to our behind-the-scenes monthly podcast, The Bullpen, where we break down all of the production that goes into Too Long and TLDR more generally, as well as getting your name printed in the thank you section of the magazine. And your final decision is if you want to subscribe. If you do, you'll get a copy of Too Long every 4 months, meaning that you'll never miss an issue. Plus, you'll also get 25% off every copy as long as you stay subscribed. If you can, subscribing also gives us a reliable income stream, which is super useful for us. Regardless of which option you choose, you can buy a copy right now at toolong.news or by clicking the link in the description. As always, thanks for your support and thanks for backing Too Long.